Hey everybody, I am doing a video this week in response to the two interviews with the gals from China. I really enjoyed those interviews a lot. In my previous video, I mentioned that I was thinking about doing my 25 book collection over books from Fiji, but I was struggling to find materials for that. And while I still have not completely lost hope with that, China was going to be my backup. So I was glad that this week came when it did so that I could kind of think about that a little bit more too. So anyway, I think the takeaways for me from those two interviews that were really fun were the conversations about like how publishing has changed in China over the years, and how, like, especially from the 1980s to now, or from 2000 to now, how things have changed dramatically. And I would have loved to have had more extended conversations about those things. I am personally not super interested in Chinese culture, but I think it's just because we are so limited in what we're exposed to from Chinese culture in the US. And a lot of it is the information that we do get about China is in some way, shape, or form neatly wrapped up as propaganda a little bit. And so it's just never really been an area of the world that I've been super interested in. But the interviews from this week really kind of changed my mind on that and made me more curious about what children's literature looks like. This week also kind of reminded me, well, and to be fair, the whole class has kind of reminded me of Info 237. I took a few semesters ago with Professor Bogan, and she's in the school library track. But in her class, she posed the question to us for one of our discussions about if you could change, for example, like in the classroom for, ninth grade, most of us, I think, read Shakespeare at some point or another. Romeo and Juliet is kind of like the standard Shakespearean play that we get introduced to. But what her question was to us was, if you could swap out the classics like that as being part of classroom literature, would you, and why or why not? And I'm sorry, I'm moving my computer around a ton, but I got a new chair and I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to get comfortable in it. But anyway, so she asked why or why not. And after I thought about that question for a while, and one of the texts that I found as a replacement for Romeo and Juliet, or an alternative to Romeo and Juliet, was a text from a Chinese American author, and it was young adult, but it was called These Violent Delights. Some of you may have heard of it. It's gotten pretty popular. And if I remember correctly, I think it was published in 2018, maybe. So it's relatively new. And, after looking at that kind of stuff, I think that they're really cool alternatives to offer to kids. But my answer ultimately was that no, I don't think I would. Even though primarily in the classroom, I feel like, well, and not just me, literature has proven that, most of the classics are from the same groups of people. They're dead white men who were in places of privilege, even in their time periods. But I think especially like classics like Shakespeare, for example, offer something that more modern texts don't. And that is a level of difficulty, or a like a deep dive into the progression of English literature as a language and the written word. And I don't think that that's something that you find in modern text as easily. And so for that reason, I would keep the classics too. But I do think that there is merit in doing kind of like a side by side and showing your students that there are alternative texts. So if a particular storyline is interesting to them, but maybe the language isn't, or it's off-putting, that there are other ways to approach the same themes, the same subjects, the same topics, and find themselves in works of literature that are by BIPOC authors, or female authors, or underrepresented groups. And so I think that's an interesting conversation that's relevant to this class. And I would be interested to know what you guys think about that same conversation. If you have any input, love to hear it. If you disagree with me, love to hear it. Would love to know why. I think if I remember correctly, in that class, the discussion that we had, most of the folks in that class, I think, opted to keep the classics also, and not entirely toss them out, especially if you would get rid of them. I'd love to hear why. Anyway, you guys have a great rest of the week. I'm gonna try and do some solid work on my 25 book mini collection this week. So we'll see what comes of that, and hopefully land one way or the other between Fiji and China. So, and I'm gonna get some more use out of my new fancy chair. How well you guys can see that, but she's real pretty. Anyway, all right, guys, have a good night.